I heard my granddaughter planning my murder over Sunday dinner. Well, not murder exactly. Nothing that crude, nothing that obvious. But she was sitting at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd fed her countless bowls of chicken soup and helped her with algebra homework, discussing how to speed things along so she could inherit my house before her student loans came due. "Grandma Rose is taking forever to die," Melissa said to her boyfriend, cutting into the pot roast I'd spent 3 hours preparing. "I mean, she's 82. How much longer can she possibly hang on?" They thought I was napping in my recliner in the living room. The woman who'd raised 4 children, buried 2 husbands, and survived the kind of hardships that make people think 82 is ancient was apparently too feeble to hear conversations happening 20 feet away. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about a lot of things. "Maybe you could, encourage her to be less careful," her boyfriend suggested. His name was Kyle, and he had the kind of weak jaw that suggested his family tree didn't branch much. Like, don't help her with the stairs anymore. Let her figure out how to carry groceries up from the basement herself. "That's actually not a bad idea," Melissa mused. "She's so stubborn about accepting help anyway. If she wants to prove she's still independent." Accidents happen to old people all the time, especially ones who refuse to admit they can't do everything they used to. I sat perfectly still in my chair, hands folded over the shawl my second husband had bought me 40 years ago, and listened to them plan my accidental death with the same casual tone they might use to discuss weekend plans. The thing about being old is that people think you're invisible. They think you're deaf or senile or so removed from the world of the living that you don't understand what's happening around you. They forget that you weren't born old, that you lived through decades they can't even imagine, that you learned things about human nature that their young hearts haven't encountered yet. They forget that some of us have been playing the long game since before they were born. Melissa had been living with me for 8 months, ever since she'd graduated from college with a degree in communications and debt that made my Depression-era childhood look prosperous. She'd moved into my guest room, temporarily, just until she found a job and saved enough for a security deposit. She'd found a job 3 weeks ago, administrative assistant at a dental office, but she'd also found something else. My will. The copy I kept in my desk drawer, the one that left everything to her because she was my only grandchild, the only family I had left who bothered to visit. Or so I'd thought. The will she'd found was real, but it wasn't current. The real one, the one I'd had updated 6 months ago after watching her treat my home like a hotel and my generosity like an entitlement, was locked in a safety deposit box she didn't know existed. But I let her believe she was my sole heir. I let her think this house, with its prime location and paid-off mortgage, would solve all her financial problems if she could just wait for nature to take its course. Apparently, she'd gotten tired of waiting. The thing is, Kyle was saying, you need to be smart about it. Can't look suspicious. What do you mean suspicious? Melissa asked, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what he meant. I mean, if something happens to her right after you move in, people might ask questions. I've been here for months. Besides, who would question it? She's old. Old people die. Yeah, but rich old people who die right before their grandchildren inherit everything. That gets attention. Rich. That was interesting. I wasn't rich by most standards, just comfortable. The house was worth something, true, and I had savings, but hardly enough to qualify as wealthy. Unless you were a 24-year-old with credit card debt and student loans. She's not that rich, Melissa said, echoing my thoughts. But the house is paid off and it's in Riverside Heights. Even a small place there is worth at least $300,000. Try 450. I thought. She'd underestimated by quite a bit. Plus she's got that old lady savings account, Kyle added. You know how people from her generation are. Probably has cash stashed all over this place. The life insurance policy is only $50,000, Melissa continued, but that's enough to pay off my loans and get me started somewhere else. Life insurance. I'd forgotten she'd asked about that last month. Said she was helping me organize my important papers. I'd thought it was sweet, her taking an interest in my affairs. How do you want to do it? Kyle asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. I stopped breathing, waiting for her answer. I don't know. Maybe stairs? She goes up and down to the basement all the time to do laundry. If she fell, would that kill her though? Old people break hips and live for years. Head injury. If she fell down the stairs and hit her head just right, you'd have to make sure she actually died. If she survived, she might remember being pushed. Who said anything about pushing? Melissa's voice had a sharp edge now. I'm talking about making sure she's unstable. Loose rug at the top of the stairs. Spilled water. Something that would make a fall more likely. They spent the next 20 minutes discussing methods with the clinical detachment of people planning a home improvement project. Loosened handrails. Strategic obstacles. The timing of when to discover my body. I sat in my chair, eyes closed, breathing so shallow they'd think I was deep asleep, and listened to my granddaughter plan my murder while eating the dinner I'd cooked for her. When they finally left, Kyle kissing my forehead and telling me what a sweet old lady I sat in my empty house and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pure, crystalline rage. Not the hot anger of youth, but the cold fury of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize evil when it wore the face of family. Melissa had been my late daughter's only child. Rebecca had died in a car accident when Melissa was 12, and I'd helped raise her through those difficult teenage years. I'd paid for her braces, her car insurance, her college application fees. I'd been the stable adult in her life when her father remarried and started a new family that didn't include his first daughter. I'd loved her. I'd trusted her. I'd planned to leave her everything because I thought she loved me too. I'd been wrong about that. But I wasn't going to be wrong about what happened next. The next morning, I called my attorney. Margaret Walsh had been my lawyer for 15 years, a woman about my age who understood that being elderly didn't mean being stupid. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more serious as I spoke. "You're sure about what you heard?" she asked when I finished. "I've been sure about a lot of things in my 82 years, Margaret. This is one of them. We need evidence. If you're going to protect yourself legally, we need more than overheard conversations." "What kind of evidence?" "Documentation. Recordings if possible. Proof that she's planning to harm you for financial gain." "How do I get that without putting myself in more danger?" Margaret leaned back in her chair, thinking. "There are ways. But Rose, you need to understand that what you're describing is attempted murder. If we're right about their intentions, we're not just talking about changing your will. We're talking about criminal charges." "Good. Are you prepared for that?" "For the publicity, the family scandal, the legal proceedings." I thought about Melissa's casual tone as she discussed the best way to arrange my accidental death. I thought about Kyle calculating whether my injuries would be fatal enough. I thought about them sitting in my kitchen, eating my food, planning my funeral. "I'm prepared," I said. Margaret outlined the steps we'd need to take. First, a new will that explicitly excluded Melissa and explained why. Second, documentation of the threats. Third, a safety plan that included changing locks, installing security cameras, and making sure I was never alone with her. "What about other family members?" Margaret asked. "Anyone else who might inherit if something happened to you?" "My sister's daughter lives in Oregon. We exchange Christmas cards. That's about it." "What about charities? Organizations you support?" I thought about that. The animal shelter. I've been volunteering there for 10 years. We'll work with that. In the meantime, you need to be extremely careful. If they're serious about this plan. "They're serious," I said. "Trust me." I left Margaret's office with a plan and a small recording device that looked like a hearing aid. The next step was the hardest part, acting normal while collecting evidence against someone I'd raised from childhood. But if 40 years of marriage to 2 different men had taught me anything, it was how to pretend everything was fine while planning for war. When Melissa came home that evening, I was in the kitchen making her favorite cookies. "Grandma Rose," she said, dropping her purse on the counter and giving me a hug that felt like betrayal against my skin. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, sweetheart. I just thought it might be nice. Carl seemed to enjoy dinner yesterday." "He really did. He said you're the best cook he's ever met." "That's sweet of him to say." She grabbed a cookie from the cooling rack, still warm from the oven. "You know, Grandma, I've been thinking about what you said last week. About maybe organizing your important papers." I hadn't said anything about organizing papers, but I nodded anyway. That would be helpful, dear. I mean, I know it's not fun to think about, but it's important to have everything in order. You know, just in case. Just in case I had an accident on the stairs. You're absolutely right, I said, measuring out ingredients for another batch. What did you have in mind? Well, we could go through your files together. Make sure I know where everything is: bank accounts, insurance policies, the deed to the house. That sort of thing. That sounds very responsible of you. She helped me finish the cookies, chattering about her new job, her plans for the weekend. Normal granddaughter conversation that would have warmed my heart a week ago. Now it felt like watching an actress rehearse for a role she'd already been cast in, the grieving granddaughter. Oh, I almost forgot, she said as we were cleaning up. Kyle mentioned that the railing on the basement stairs felt a little loose when he was down there yesterday. I froze. Kyle hadn't been in my basement yesterday. Really? Yeah, he said he went down to check on that noise you mentioned. The furnace making that weird sound. I hadn't mentioned any noise. How thoughtful of him to look into that. He said the railing definitely needs to be fixed. It could be dangerous if someone was carrying a laundry basket and lost their balance. There it was. The setup. They were going to loosen the railing and wait for me to fall. I'll have someone take a look at it, I said carefully. Actually, maybe don't worry about it right away. I mean, repair people are so expensive, and you've been watching your budget lately. Have I? Well, you mentioned the grocery bills seem higher than they used to be. When did I mention that? A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Last week sometime. You said you might need to be more careful with money. Another lie. I'd never said anything like that. You're right, I said. I should be more careful. That night, after Melissa went to bed, I crept down to the basement to check the railing myself. It had been solidly attached to the wall for 20 years, but now I could feel it move when I put pressure on it. Someone had loosened the screws just enough to make it unstable. I tightened them back up and took pictures with my phone, documenting the evidence of tampering. Then I went upstairs and called Margaret. They've already started, I told her. Started what? Sabotaging the house. The basement stair railing has been loosened. Did you fix it? Yes, but I documented it first. Good. Rose, I think it's time to accelerate our timeline. If they're actively creating dangerous conditions. What do you mean? I mean we move fast. New will sign this week. Security system installed tomorrow. And I think you need to consider staying somewhere else for a few days while we get everything in order. Absolutely not, I said. This is my house. I'm not letting them drive me out of it. Rose. Margaret, I've been running from problems my whole life. I ran from my first husband when he started drinking. I ran from my second husband when he started gambling. I'm 82 years old, and I'm done running. This is different. This is about your safety. This is about my dignity. And my dignity stays right here. She sighed. Then we do this the hard way. But Rose, you cannot let your guard down for a second. Not around her, not around him, not around anyone who might be involved. Understood. And if anything feels wrong, if you sense immediate danger, you call 911 first and me second. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd overheard them planning my death and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. For months, I'd been playing the role of the helpless old woman, accepting Melissa's help with gratitude, pretending I needed her presence in my life. I'd been diminishing myself, making myself smaller and weaker and more dependent than I actually was. But I wasn't helpless. I was experienced. And there's a difference between being old and being foolish. They thought they were hunting a wounded deer. They were about to discover they'd cornered a lioness. Over the next week, I became the perfect target. I started moving more slowly, as if my joints were stiffening. I began forgetting small things, where I'd put my reading glasses, whether I'd taken my evening medication, what day of the week it was. I started asking for help with tasks I'd been managing independently for months. Melissa, dear, I said one evening, could you help me carry this laundry basket downstairs? It seems heavier than it used to. She jumped up from the couch so quickly it was almost comical. Of course, Grandma Rose. You shouldn't be carrying heavy things up and down those stairs. You're probably right. I've been feeling less steady lately. Have you? The concern in her voice was expertly performed. Maybe we should talk to your doctor about that. Oh, I don't want to bother Dr. Peterson with old lady complaints. It's not bothering him. That's what he's there for. She helped me down the basement stairs, her hand hovering near my elbow as if she was ready to steady me if I stumbled. Or push me if I didn't. These stairs are pretty steep, she observed. And kind of narrow. I've been going up and down them for 23 years, I said. Never had a problem before. But you're older now. Things change. I suppose they do. She helped me load the washing machine, then guided me back upstairs with exaggerated care. Once we reached the kitchen, she turned to me with that sweet, concerned smile I'd fallen for so many times. Grandma, I've been thinking. Maybe it would be better if I handled the laundry from now on. Those stairs really are dangerous. That's very thoughtful of you, dear. And maybe some of the other household stuff too. I don't mind helping. What kind of household stuff? Well, like going up to the attic to get things. Or down to the basement for supplies. Any place where you might, lose your footing. She wanted to eliminate all the scenarios where I might legitimately be on dangerous staircases, leaving only the accident she and Kyle had planned. That makes sense, I said. You're such a good granddaughter. The words tasted like poison in my mouth, but her smile was radiant. I just love you so much, Grandma Rose. I want to make sure you're safe. That night, Kyle came over for dinner again. I made his favorite, meatloaf with mashed potatoes, and listened to them discuss my increasing frailty with the fake concern of undertakers measuring a coffin. She seems a lot more unsteady than she was a few weeks ago, Kyle observed, cutting his meatloaf into precise squares. I know, Melissa agreed. I'm really worried about her on those stairs. Maybe you should consider moving your bedroom down here, Kyle suggested to me. The guest room is nice and close to the bathroom. Oh, I couldn't do that. I've slept in the same bedroom for over 20 years. But wouldn't it be safer? Probably. But you know how stubborn old people can be about change. They exchanged one of their looks. What if something happened to you in the middle of the night? Melissa asked. What if you fell and I couldn't hear you calling for help? I suppose that's always been a risk. But it's getting worse, isn't it? The unsteadiness? I paused, as if considering the question seriously. Maybe a little. I hate to admit it, but maybe a little. You should see your doctor, Kyle said. Get checked for vertigo or inner ear problems or something. Or maybe it's just age, I replied. Some things can't be fixed. After dinner, Melissa walked Kyle to his car. I watched from the kitchen window as they had what looked like an urgent conversation in the driveway. When she came back inside, her cheeks were flushed with excitement. Everything all right, dear? I asked. Fine, Grandma. Kyle was just saying how much he cares about you. How worried we both are. You don't need to worry about me. But we do. You're family. Family. The word hung between us like a blade. That night, I lay in my bed, the same bed I'd shared with my second husband for 15 years before his heart gave out, and listened to Melissa moving around downstairs. She was supposed to be asleep, but I could hear drawers opening and closing, papers rustling, the soft creak of floorboards as she moved through rooms she thought I couldn't monitor from upstairs. She was looking for something. Probably trying to find additional assets she hadn't accounted for, or maybe searching for life insurance policies with higher payouts. What she didn't know was that I was awake, alert, and recording every sound with the device Margaret had given me. What she also didn't know was that I'd removed everything of real value from the obvious hiding places weeks ago. Let her search. Let her plan. Let her get so confident in her scheme that she'd make the mistakes that would bury her. I was 82 years old, but I wasn't dead yet. And I was going to make sure she remembered that. It happened on a Thursday morning. I was carrying a basket of clean laundry up from the basement, moving carefully but not suspiciously slowly. Melissa had left for work 20 minutes earlier, or so I thought. Halfway up the stairs, my foot slipped. The step was wet, not soaking, just damp enough to eliminate traction. I grabbed for the handrail and felt it give way under my weight, the screws pulling loose from wood that had been weakened just enough to fail under pressure. I fell backward, the laundry basket flying, sheets and towels cascading around me like snow as I tumbled down 8 wooden steps to the concrete basement floor. For a moment, I lay still, taking inventory. My left shoulder screamed with pain. My hip felt wrong. Blood ran from a cut on my forehead where I'd struck the edge of a step. But I was conscious. I was breathing. And I was furious. The fall hadn't been an accident. The wet step, the loosened railing, it was exactly what they'd planned. What I hadn't expected was the timing. Melissa was supposed to be at work. Grandma Rose? Oh my God, Grandma Rose. She appeared at the top of the stairs, cell phone already in her hand, her voice pitched perfectly between shock and grief. If I hadn't known better, I'd have believed she'd just discovered a terrible accident. "I'm calling 911, she said, fingers flying over her phone screen. "Don't move, Grandma. Help is coming." As she spoke to the emergency dispatcher, I noticed she was still wearing her pajamas. She hadn't gone to work. She'd been waiting for this moment, probably watching from somewhere in the house to make sure the trap worked as planned. "Yes, she fell down the basement stairs," she was saying. "She's conscious, but she's bleeding from her head. I think she might have broken something." I tried to speak, to tell her I knew what she'd done, but the pain was making it hard to focus. And maybe that was better. Let her think the fall had gone according to plan. Let her believe she was about to inherit everything she'd worked so hard to steal. "They'll be here in 5 minutes, she said, ending the call and hurrying down the stairs. "Just hold on, Grandma Rose. You're going to be okay." She knelt beside me, her hands hovering uncertainly. "Can you hear me? Can you tell me where it hurts?" I looked up at her face, young, beautiful, concerned, and saw nothing behind her eyes. No real worry, no genuine fear. Just calculation. She was already planning my funeral in her head. "Everything hurts," I whispered. I know. The paramedics will be here soon. Just hang on." "The railing broke," I managed. "I know. I saw. It must have been loose. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I should have had it fixed." Even now, even with me bleeding on her basement floor, she couldn't resist playing her role. The paramedics arrived with sirens and efficiency, filling my quiet house with urgent voices and medical equipment. They asked questions, took measurements, stabilized my neck, and loaded me onto a stretcher with professional confidence. As they carried me up from the basement, I caught sight of the broken railing, the wet step, the scattered laundry that told the story of an old woman's fatal mistake. But it wasn't my mistake. And it wasn't going to be fatal. In the ambulance, as the paramedic checked my vital signs and started in 4, I closed my eyes and let myself feel the pain. My shoulder was definitely broken. Maybe ribs too. The cut on my head would need stitches. But I was alive. And more importantly, I was thinking clearly. Phase 1 of their plan had succeeded. I'd fallen, I was injured, and I was now in a position where they could argue I was too frail to live independently. What they didn't know was that I'd been expecting this. What they couldn't have planned for was that I'd prepared for it. At the hospital, as doctors examined x-rays and nurses cleaned my wounds, Melissa played the part of the devoted granddaughter with Academy Award precision. She held my uninjured hand, spoke to doctors about my recent confusion, and made concerned phone calls to people who would need to know about my accident. "She's been having some balance issues," I heard her tell Dr. Hamilton. "And some memory problems. I've been worried about her living alone. Has she seen a neurologist? She's been resistant to seeing doctors. You know how elderly people can be about admitting they need help. Elderly people." As if I wasn't lying right there listening to her lies. "We'll need to do a full assessment," Dr. Hamilton said. "Head injury in someone her age can be serious." "Of course. Whatever she needs." When they finally left me alone, I used the hospital phone to call Margaret. "Rose? I heard about the accident. How badly are you hurt?" "Broken shoulder, bruised ribs, concussion." "But Margaret, it wasn't an accident." "What do you mean?" "They did exactly what they said they would do. Wet step, loosened railing." Melissa was supposed to be at work, but she was home, waiting. My God. Did you get any of it on recording? Some. Not enough to prove premeditation, but enough to show she lied about when she discovered me. "Rose, this changes everything. If they're willing to actually hurt you, then we accelerate the timeline. How quickly can you get here?" "I'm already in my car." An hour later, Margaret arrived with a briefcase and the determination of someone who'd spent 30 years protecting clients from their own families. She'd brought the new will, properly witnessed and notarized, along with documentation that would make Melissa's next steps much more difficult than she'd planned. The good news, Margaret said, is that you're clearly competent to make legal decisions. The hospital staff will testify to that if necessary. What's the bad news? The bad news is that you're injured badly enough that she might be able to argue you need supervised care. If she petitions for guardianship, she won't get it. How can you be sure? I smiled, tasting blood from the cut on my lip. Because I'm not the helpless victim she thinks I am. And it's time to remind her of that. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. During that time, Melissa visited twice daily, bringing flowers and magazines and the kind of devoted attention that would look wonderful to anyone who didn't know the truth. She spoke to doctors, nurses, and social workers about my declining condition and her willingness to take care of Grandma Rose in her time of need. What she didn't know was that Margaret had spent those 3 days building a legal fortress around my assets and my autonomy. On Friday morning, Dr. Hamilton cleared me for discharge with instructions for physical therapy and follow-up appointments. My shoulder was in a sling, my head was bandaged, and I moved like someone who'd fallen down a flight of stairs. But my mind was sharp, and my resolve was diamond hard. "I'll take such good care of you, Grandma Rose," Melissa said as she helped me into her car. "We'll get you home and comfortable." "That's very sweet of you, dear. I've been thinking, maybe this is a sign that it's time to make some changes. For your safety." "What kind of changes?" "Well, maybe you shouldn't be living alone anymore. Maybe it's time to consider other options. Assisted living." She was already laying the groundwork. "I suppose you're right," I said, slumping against the passenger seat as if the conversation was too exhausting to navigate. "I don't want to be a burden to anyone." "You're not a burden, Grandma. You're family. That's why I want to help." When we arrived at my house, Kyle was waiting on the front porch with takeout bags and another one of those concerned smiles. "Rose, thank God you're okay," he said, helping me out of the car with exaggerated gentleness. "We were so worried." "That's very kind of you. I brought your favorite, soup from that deli downtown. Figured you might not feel like cooking for a while." They installed me in my living room recliner with pillows and blankets, fussing over my comfort while discussing my future as if I wasn't capable of participating in the conversation. "The important thing now is making sure she doesn't have another accident," Melissa said. "Absolutely," Kyle agreed. "Maybe we should look into home health aides? Someone who could be here during the day." "That's expensive," Melissa said. "And honestly, I'm not sure Grandma Rose is ready for strangers in her house." "What about family supervision?" "I'd love to help more, but I can't quit my job." They were setting up the scenario perfectly. I was too frail to be left alone, too stubborn to accept professional help, and too proud to move to a facility. The only solution would be for Melissa to become my full-time caregiver, with access to my finances and legal authority to make decisions about my welfare. It was a beautiful plan. It might have worked on someone else. "Actually," I said, interrupting their performance, "I've been thinking about what you said, Melissa. About making changes." They both turned to me with barely concealed excitement. "Oh, I think you're right. It's time to accept that I'm not as young as I used to be." "That's very wise of you, Grandma Rose. So I've made some arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" I reached into the bag Margaret had left beside my chair and pulled out a manila envelope. "Legal arrangements. I've updated my will." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You, what?" Melissa's voice was carefully controlled. I realized after the accident that I needed to be more realistic about my situation. So I called my attorney from the hospital and made some changes. "What kind of changes?" "Well, I've decided to leave the house to the animal shelter. They've been such a big part of my life, and they need the resources." Melissa went very still. "The animal shelter?" "And the rest of my assets will be divided between several charities that have meant a lot to me over the years. The food bank, the literacy program at the library." "Grandma Rose, you can't be serious." "Oh, but I am. Margaret says it's all perfectly legal." Kyle found his voice. "But what about Melissa?" "She's your granddaughter." "She is." That's why I've left her my jewelry and some personal mementos. Things that have sentimental value. The silence that followed was deafening. Grandma, Melissa said slowly, I think you might be confused. Maybe the head injury. The head injury didn't affect my judgment, dear. If anything, it clarified my thinking. But why would you do this? I'm your family. Are you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Of course I am. Family members don't sabotage staircases. Her face went white. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the wet step that wasn't wet when I went downstairs. I'm talking about the railing that had been loosened just enough to fail. I'm talking about the granddaughter who was supposed to be at work but was home, waiting to play the grieving discoverer of my body. Kyle started to stand. I think we should go. Sit down, I said, and something in my voice made him freeze. We're not finished. Grandma rose. You're not making sense, Melissa said, but her voice was shaking now. I'm making perfect sense. I heard you planning this. Both of you. Last Sunday, after dinner, you sat in my kitchen and discussed the best way to arrange my accidental death. That's impossible. You were asleep. I was listening. I heard every word. I reached into the envelope and pulled out a small recording device, including the conversation you had 3 days ago when you thought I was unconscious in the hospital. I pressed play. Melissa's voice filled the room. She's tougher than we thought. The fall should have killed her. Kyle's voice. Maybe we need to try something else. Hospital accidents happen all the time. Melissa. No, we stick to the original plan. She's injured now, confused. Perfect time to get power of attorney. I turned off the recording and looked at their faces. Kyle looked like he might be sick. Melissa looked like she was calculating whether she could overpower an injured 82-year-old woman. You recorded us, she whispered. I protected myself. That's illegal. No, it's not. Single-party consent state. And even if it were illegal, attempted murder trumps surveillance violations. We didn't try to murder you. No? Then explain the staircase. Explain why you were home when you were supposed to be at work. Explain why you've been lying to doctors about my mental state. She couldn't. We all knew she couldn't. Get out, I said quietly. Grandma rose. Get out of my house. Take your boyfriend, take your lies, and get out. If you come back, I'll have you arrested for elder abuse, attempted murder, and fraud. You can't do this. I'm your granddaughter. No, I said, struggling to my feet despite the pain in my shoulder. You're a stranger who happened to share DNA with someone I loved. My granddaughter died the day she decided I was worth more to her dead than alive. They left, Kyle dragging Melissa toward the door as she protested and threatened and finally, desperately, begged. I watched from my window as they drove away, and for the first time in months, my house felt like home again. That was 6 months ago. I'm writing this from my sunroom, the one I had built with money they thought would be theirs. My shoulder healed crooked, and I'll always walk with a slight limp from the damage to my hip. But I'm alive, I'm independent, and I'm finally free from the fear that had been poisoning my life. The legal proceedings were swift and decisive. The recording, combined with evidence of the sabotage staircase, made their intentions clear even to the most skeptical investigators. Melissa pleaded guilty to elder abuse and attempted fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. Kyle, faced with charges as an accessory, testified against her and received probation. She wrote me letters from prison, claiming she'd been desperate, claiming she'd never meant to hurt me, claiming she loved me and had just made terrible mistakes. I threw them away unopened after the third one. Love doesn't plan your murder over Sunday dinner. The house feels different now. Lighter. I had the basement stairs completely rebuilt with a solid oak railing and non-slip treads. Not because I was afraid, but because I refused to live with the physical reminder of their betrayal. I still volunteer at the animal shelter 3 days a week. The dogs don't care that I'm 82, or that I move a little slower than I used to, or that I sometimes need help lifting the heavy food bags. They just care that I show up. Margaret helped me set up a trust that will ensure the shelter gets everything when I'm gone, really gone, not fake murdered by family gone. The staff there cried when I told them. Real tears, not the performed grief I'd seen from Melissa. I've made new friends too. Other women who've survived family betrayal, who understand that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty and that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you most need protection from. There's Eleanor, whose son tried to have her committed so he could access her retirement savings. There's Patricia, whose daughter forged her signature on a reverse mortgage application. There's Janet, whose nephew convinced her doctor she was suicidal so he could get her hospitalized and gain temporary guardianship. We meet for coffee every Tuesday morning at the diner on Main Street. We call ourselves the Survivors Club, though Eleanor wanted to call us the Phoenix Society because we all rose from the ashes of families that tried to bury us. We share stories, strategies, and sometimes just silence when the betrayal is too fresh to put into words. We've learned to recognize the signs, the sudden interest in finances, the manufactured concerns about competency, the gentle suggestions about making things easier. Most importantly, we've learned to trust our instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. When family members start treating you like a burden instead of a person, they're telling you who they really are. Believe them. The ironic thing is that I'm healthier now than I've been in years. The stress of living with someone who wanted me dead was literally killing me. My blood pressure is down, my sleep is better, and my doctor says I have the bone density of a woman 20 years younger. Spite is apparently excellent for your health, he joked during my last checkup. He's not wrong. I wake up every morning knowing that I survived their trap, that I outplayed people 50 years younger than me, that I turned their greed into their downfall. There's something deeply satisfying about that. I've started a blog too, something I never thought I'd do at my age. It's called Still Standing, an elder's guide to family predators. I write about the tactics I've seen, the legal protections available, and the signs that should make anyone suspicious of suddenly helpful family members. The response has been overwhelming. I get letters from people all over the country, mostly elderly women who recognize their own stories in mine. Some are in the early stages of family manipulation. Others are fighting legal battles against children or grandchildren who see them as paychecks rather than people. I try to answer every letter. I share Margaret's contact information for legal advice, and I always include the same message: you are not paranoid. You are not overreacting. Trust your instincts, document everything, and remember that you have the right to protect yourself from anyone who would harm you, even family. Especially family. Because here's what I've learned in my 82 years: love is not inheritance rights. Love is not access to assets. Love is not the assumption that you'll provide for someone after death regardless of how they treat you while living. Love is showing up when someone is sick, not when they're dying and you're inheriting. Love is caring about their well-being, not their will. Love is protecting them from harm, not planning their harm. The people who truly love you will want you to live as long and as independently as possible. They'll support your decisions about your own life and your own assets. They'll grieve when you're gone because they'll miss you, not because they're worried about their financial future. Anyone who treats your continued existence as an inconvenience doesn't love you. They love what they think you can give them. And you don't owe anyone anything just because you share DNA. I've rewritten my will again since Melissa's conviction. The animal shelter is still the primary beneficiary, but I've also included provisions for several other organizations that support elderly people against family fraud. I want my death, when it comes naturally, many years from now, to help other people avoid what I went through. Margaret has copies of everything, along with video testimony I recorded explaining my decisions and my mental state. If anyone tries to contest the will by claiming I was incompetent or unduly influenced, they'll have to explain why an incompetent person was sharp enough to outmaneuver two people planning her murder. Last month, I got a call from a reporter who wanted to interview me about elder abuse by family members. The story ran in the Sunday paper with the headline, "Grandmother Outsmarts Murderous Heirs." They used my favorite photo, me in my garden, surrounded by the roses I planted after rebuilding my life. The article generated dozens of responses from other families dealing with similar situations. Some were from elderly victims seeking advice. Others were from adult children who'd witnessed siblings or other relatives attempting financial manipulation of their parents. But the most surprising responses came from young people Melissa's age, who were horrified by what their generation was capable of. One woman wrote to say she'd noticed her brother asking suspicious questions about their mother's finances and had started paying closer attention. Another said the story had prompted a family discussion about inheritance expectations and financial planning. "I never realized how my casual comments about Mom's house might sound to her," she wrote. "We had a long talk about her wishes and my expectations, and I think we both feel better now." That gave me hope. Not everyone in Melissa's generation sees elderly relatives as obstacles to wealth. Some still understand that family means caring for people, not profiting from them. I frame these letters and keep them in a box in my bedroom. On days when I feel cynical about human nature, I read them and remember that evil is loud but goodness is more common. The seasons have turned twice since my accident. I've survived 2 more winters, 2 more springs, countless days that Melissa and Kyle thought I'd never see. Every morning I wake up is a victory over their greed, a proof that love, real love, from people who actually care about me, is stronger than family obligation motivated by financial gain. I'm planning my 83rd birthday party for next month. The guest list includes the staff from the animal shelter, the ladies from the Survivors Club, Margaret and her family, and several neighbors who've become genuine friends over the past year. People who celebrate my life, not my death. People who would mourn my passing because they'd miss me, not because they'd lose access to my assets. People who understand that the best inheritance anyone can leave is the memory of a life well lived and love freely given. That's the party I want. That's the family I choose. That's the legacy I'm building with whatever years I have left. And if you're listening to this story, if you recognize yourself in Rose or in any of the people who tried to use her, know this: it's never too late to choose differently. It's never too late to value people over profit. It's never too late to let love be about love instead of money. But if you see yourself in Melissa or Kyle, if you've ever looked at an elderly relative and calculated their net worth, if you've ever wished someone would die faster so you could inherit sooner, know this too. Some of us are sharper than you think. Some of us are paying attention. Some of us are prepared to fight back. And you underestimate us at your peril. My name is Rose Patterson. I am 82 years old. I survived the people who tried to murder me for my house, and I'm still here to tell the story. I'm not a victim. I'm not a statistic. I'm not a cautionary tale. I'm the woman who refused to die on someone else's timeline. And I'm still standing. If this story spoke to you, if you've seen these warning signs in your own life or someone else's, don't ignore them. Document everything. Get legal help. Trust your instincts. And remember, you have the right to live safely in your own home, to make your own decisions about your assets, and to choose who gets the privilege of calling you family. Some privileges have to be earned. And some people, no matter how much DNA you share, never earn them. Your life matters. Your safety matters. Your peace of mind matters. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they're telling you everything you need to know about why they shouldn't be in your life. Stay strong. Stay vigilant. And remember, you're never too old to start over. Trust me. I'm living proof.